Welcome to This Is You, the podcast. As our journeys unfold, so do our identities. What makes you, you? This podcast explores how different life experiences, concepts, or themes like friendship, religion, loneliness impact how we see ourselves and the world. Join me on this journey as we talk to new guests and learn about their life experiences, reflect on our own, and see what it means for all of us going forward. Your journey to learn more begins now.
Sania is a Canadian-born Pakistani and the second of 3 children, also known as a middle child. She graduated from York University in 2017, during which she worked for me for 2 years as a work-study student. Sania currently works at a health regulatory body as a project administrator. In today's conversation, Sania and I actually both talk about our experience being middle children. So we talk about middle child syndrome, how being a middle child has led to certain tendencies such as people-pleasing, wanting to be peacemakers, feeling neglected, and really trying to figure out our role in our families.
We basically grew up as a typical first-generation immigrant family. I'm the second of 3 children, so I have an older sister and a younger brother, and we're all 4 years apart. So my sister is 4 years older than me, and I'm 4 years older than my brother. Middle child syndrome, I think it's funny because, there seems to be some sort of a debate around this, and some people think it's a myth, but I think it's only middle children who really advocate for it and say, no, it's a real thing. Let's destigmatize this. And it is. I think that we sort of grow up with this sense of, independence. That's something I've talked about a lot. Middle children do tend to be more independent because we're given the space. And I think that space comes from, well, the oldest is basically responsible for a lot of things that, it's a lot of responsibility for a kid. The youngest is protected by one or more siblings. So, you have that space to sort of just observe, and then you can delegate to the younger sibling, or you can choose how to delegate if you didn't like how your older sibling delegated to you. And, you start to sort of create an identity for yourself as well, because every child plays a different role, and you're really just trying to find the role that you play. So is it the oldest, the responsible one, or the baby? It's neither. So where do you fit? And so you're just trying to create your own identity. But yeah, independence has always been a thing. It's also been, I have an interesting relationship with both of my siblings. It's an interesting dynamic. But for the most part, I think you always grow up with the sense of I've always sort of done things myself.
Yeah.
And and I don't know about you, but that's just been something that's very prevalent in my idea. Although that's not entirely true. It's also, my idea of middle child syndrome has changed recently because I'm more aware of certain complexities and nuances that I was ignorant to before. But yeah, for the most part, I just want to definitely put out there, middle child syndrome is a thing.
Yeah. So I agree with you that it's a thing. And actually, I looked up, I was like, what will I find if I look up middle child syndrome as a definition? Okay, so I found 2, and they basically say the same thing, but I'm going to share them with you. So one of them comes from Wikipedia. Says middle child syndrome is the feeling of exclusion by middle children. This effect occurs because the first child is more prone to receiving privileges and responsibilities by virtue of being the oldest, while the youngest in the family is more likely to receive indulgences. The second or middle child no longer has their status as a baby and is left with no clear role in the family or a feeling of being left out. And the second one came from Urban Dictionary, and it basically said a lot of the same things, but for me anyway, I related to some of the examples they talked about. So they said middle child syndrome is when a child is born in between other child and feels neglected. The middle child is faced with challenges such as feeling like nothing, not worthy, no one caring, etc. The older child gets a lot of attention and gets everything first. Sometimes they're seen as the most dependable people through the eyes of family and parents. And the youngest child is also known as the baby, and they get more attention. And the child with most attention also gets away with more stuff and usually has less discipline. So the middle child is usually left without anything, and people tend to not notice they're there. Or they end up feeling left out or forgotten. So this is someone's definition, right? They go,
Wow.
Parents don't usually focus on their needs only in dire emergencies. Middle children seek love and happiness through friends and become social butterflies, but through neglect by the parents, and the child drifts away and becomes a loner with family. So it's like, the person who wrote this definition for Urban Dictionary sounds like experienced a bunch of things that they talked about here. And for me, I've also experienced a bunch of those things, but I can also relate to what you were just saying, that as I've gotten older, I've seen more of the nuances that come into play, especially as I became a parent myself. I realized how hard being a parent is. And now that I'm about to have my second child, I won't have a middle child unless I have a third, which I don't think I'm going to do. But I don't want to put that on my second baby. But anyway, even thinking about the first and the second, how you balance that piece, it's so much more complicated than I understood it to be. But this feeling of being left out or neglected, and you kind of talk about the independence to sort of find your identity and sort of having to figure it out because the attention is not necessarily placed on you.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I have felt a lot is trying to people please. It's
Yeah.
been a big part of my personality, like the bridge between the two siblings, trying to like have everyone get along. So what has that been like for you?
No, I think people pleasing has definitely been a big part of my identity, especially in the earlier days, right? Like when I was like really young, I just didn't want anyone to feel left out. So I have trouble sort of differentiating if it's because I'm the middle child. I think that's definitely a huge contributing factor. I think there's a general sensitivity that exists, between me and my siblings as well. Like we tend to be very sensitive people. But yeah, peacemakers for sure. I think people who like just natural coordinators of things and just making sure that, everyone's sort of doing okay. And the people pleasing also sort of carried over to friendships as well too, right? And again, it kind of comes down to learning boundaries and all that, some stuff that you don't really understand, especially being in the role of a middle child. Yeah, so with people pleasing, that's definitely been something that I've struggled with for a really long time. I just want to also talk about the second definition with neglect. And I think that that's something that every middle child has experienced in some capacity. Like neglect just becomes the term. And so when you bring that up with your family, it's not to say that, oh, parents, you love me less. And I think it's just about, feeling like you weren't heard. Like the neglect sort of comes from this space of, it doesn't seem like it was an equal opportunity for everyone to sort of say what they want to say. There was more emphasis or more value placed on what, the eldest said. And understandable in some respects, but I think that it's really important for every child to sort of feel like, yeah, I know what role I play, or I am being heard, even if it's not like entirely considered. Just creating the space where everyone sort of feels like, yeah, I can weigh in and I can feel engaged with whatever is going on. So the neglect isn't like, unequal love distribution. It's just more about my voice was sort of neglected.
I think that's interesting because I think for a long time I perceived it as less love for me, that I wasn't as valuable or, worthy or whatever, insert sad definition here. I think though in actuality it was not knowing what my place was. So similar to what you were saying, not really knowing what role I played in the family. And like what I've learned as a parent is that you can sort of give your attention wherever it's needed because there's so many things going on in your mind all the time. And so you try to give your attention equally, but it's sort of on like whatever is most pressing or most emergent, right?
Yeah.
And that's where you're sort of dealing with it. And I think what ends up happening sometimes is your oldest child is going through the phases first. So they have certain needs. You've never dealt with those needs before. So you're sort of hyper aware of what those things are because it's new for you. And then your baby is your baby in the sense that, you're sort of sensitive to, they're still learning stuff. They're still growing. You sort of mellowed out by the time there's a third, and so you're sort of kind of aware of what they need. But in the middle, you're sort of not the baby. You're not the eldest. And so it's trying to figure out, your needs may not be articulated. You may not know how to articulate your needs. Or you might be really different from your siblings. And then it's difficult sometimes to figure out, well, how do I give you what you need? Even if I know what that is, right? Like you may not even know what that is. So I relate to that. And then I think the other part actually is, I don't know if this ever happened to you, but like I had people tell me that I didn't matter because I was the middle child. Like literally like,
wow.
yeah. And I think they were sort of youngish themselves. And sometimes in our culture, I think people just say stuff and they don't think of how that might affect someone.
This wasn't coming from a place of joking. It was a
I don't know. So I have an older brother who's 6 years older and a sister who's 7 years younger. And so I remember when my sister was about to be born, or like in the very early days, maybe, within the first year or so, I had people in my extended family say things to me like, oh, you're the middle child, nobody cares about you now. And like, you're not
mm,
important and
mm,
all of this sort of stuff. I don't think they were seriously thinking about what they were saying. They were like teenagers. And I think our culture too sometimes is like people say stuff, you just take it with a grain of salt.
mm,
That's how my parents grew up. People said stuff to them
yeah,
all the time, and it's like they
yeah.
just didn't care. Or they really cared and they said nothing, but they didn't touch who they were. You know what I mean? But for me, I was
Yeah, it impacts
impressionable.
you.
Yeah, yeah. I think what happens is sometimes if you have a core belief, you then see things that prove that core belief instead of things that don't prove that core belief, right? And that could be anything. And so when you're sort of primed this way, you start to see instances where you feel like, oh yeah, that proves that that's the case. Even though there
Mm-hmm.
might be instances that don't, but you may not pay attention to those things. You know what I mean?
100%.
So
Yeah.
I think that sort of plays a role in it too for me. And I had to learn how to do a lot of stuff on my own. I had my brother was amazing and he was very supportive and I learned a lot from him, but I was very
Mm-hmm.
different from him, similar to how you're different from your sister. And so navigating, well, who am I? And like, and all of that was
Yeah.
really hard.
That's similar for me as well. The eldest has paved a certain path and is tested and tried, so the parents trust that path too. But for you, you start sort of becoming a little bit more cognizant of, well, is this the path for me as well, or will this work for me as an individual? Because again, you've had that space to really think about yourself,
Mm,
at an individual capacity, and then you start questioning things, right? And this naturally, it's just become a part of who you are because you're figuring so many things out on yourself, or it feels like it. So then the path that's already been paved for you, you're going to question, should I even follow that path?
hmm
And that plays a big part in developing your own personal identity. And also, coming back to your comment on articulating needs, I find middle children tend to be also the best communicators.
Yeah.
We really work on that art of being able to, choose the correct words to that really, really speak to how we feel. So that's definitely a plus point. It serves you in a lot of ways.
Hire a middle child.
Yeah, we have excellent communication
And great
skills.
coordination skills too. Don't forget about that part. Oh, that's so funny. So when you talk about paving your own path, can you give me an example of something where your sister created a particular path, but then you found yourself thinking, I'm not sure if I want to be on this path. I want to be maybe on a different path.
I can give you a very simple illustrative example. So let's talk about university courses, right? So my sister, she did a BSc from York University in biology. So she's like all about science. And also I want to mention for a big chunk of my life, my sister has been also the role model or the inspiration. She's, from when I was really young, like a child, and saying well before I was a teenager, the way she did things just became very ideal for me. And I wanted to emulate that in my own life. But then as I became a teenager, I started to question a lot of things. And, even just one illustrative example, again, is the university pathway. So when I started to go to university, or when I was applying to go to university, yeah, York University seemed to be the more viable option because, again, tested and tried, also a lot closer. So that's another plus point. But a BSc or biology, is that really for me? And I did apply for certain BSc degrees, but I also knew that I didn't want to do science. I was conflicted between science and business. I didn't want to do a full out business degree because in my mind at the time it was sort of like, I don't want to just be pumped out into the system of, the corporate world and capitalism. I was just really like not about that. So I was like, how can I just find that balance between doing meaningful work or studying something meaningful, but also honing on the skills that I have that I feel like are more geared towards a business, or my skills just sort of spoke more towards like the business side of things. So that's why I chose what I chose, which is Bachelor of Health Studies, specializing in health management. And this is a completely unconventional, like no one really knows what that is.
Yep.
So the amount of times I had to really explain why I'm doing this or what this degree is really about was just insane, especially in our community. So one person once asked me, "Are you going to be a food inspector?" And I'm like, "No." All respect to food inspector, but I'm trying to just learn about the healthcare system and how to bring efficiencies into it. And that was just like, what? So yeah, for most people, it's just kind of like really dichotomous. It's either science or 100% business or engineering or, law. Like it's not really like a mishmash. And again, so that's something that I had to really just believe in at an individual level. Be like, yeah, no, I know I feel good about this choice and I know why I'm doing this. There's a reason why I'm doing this. I thought about this. It's not just because it's easier to explain to people, or people might think you're a food inspector when you're just trying to work as a health administrator. It's about, really owning this decision. So that's just like one smaller scale example. But again, as I progressed through adulthood or my teenage years and throughout university, I did choose paths and I did make decisions that were completely outside of the path that my sister paved, or that cookie cutter life that I was told was the best way to live life.
So two of the things that you said that I relate to, one was your sister was your role model. My brother, I idolized him when I was a kid. I would tell everybody he's like this tall on this building. I was like so much shorter than he was. So in my mind, he was like huge, right? So I would tell people that, and I wanted all of his old stuff. I wanted to be just like him, and I would like follow him wherever he went. It didn't necessarily shift as I became a teenager. I think what happened for me and him was that we're also very different. And some of those differences, I think, became more prominent as we've gotten older, and it continued to become more prominent. My brother is like a lot less emotional than I am, for example, right? Like I can talk about my feelings all the time, right? That's why I'm doing this podcast. But my brother is a lot more like my parents, I think, where he doesn't read into things that much, He feels pretty solid in certain core feelings or beliefs that he has, and so things don't phase him in the same sort of way, and he's much more likely to be like have things roll off his back and need to be like no, that actually deeply affected me. And so I think in that sense I felt that way, but I definitely idolized him as well and wanted to be just like him. The other part of your story actually that's really relatable to me is, picking a path that people don't understand. So like I did my undergrad in HR, and even I didn't know what that was the first year. My cousin's wife actually recommended HR to me because I was torn between psychology and business in high school. And she was like, you're dealing with a lot of people and there's a business aspect to it. And, maybe you might be interested. And so I thought, okay, like I looked into a little bit. But at that time, so this is like 15 years ago. My God, I can't believe that. Okay.
Time flies.
When I started my undergrad, not when I finished. I'm not that old, okay? But anyway, when I started my undergrad, this was about 15 years ago. And at that time, especially, nobody knew what HR was. And so trying to explain what my undergrad was in, especially to like extended family or anybody, they just didn't understand. And then, what I chose as a career, working in higher education, working university, also not easily to explain and very difficult. So are you a prof? No, I'm not a prof. So then what are you? And it's like, well, I help people develop skills related to leadership. I coordinate different support programs, blah, blah, blah. And you could just see their eyes glaze over because they did not understand what I was talking about, right? And I couldn't blame them either because it was like, I didn't know those jobs existed, right? Like, unless you work in that field, you don't really have an awareness that, oh yeah, these jobs exist. People do this stuff. Universities are not just profs and presidents and students, right? There's a whole line of staff that are holding up the institution as well. And so I found that part really hard. And it actually relates a little bit to people pleasing. I think the part it was very frustrating for me to not be able to explain what I was doing and have people understand, because I did want people to feel proud of what I was pursuing. And because of the people pleasing sort of aspect of my personality. And so when I wasn't able to, that was sort of hard for me, you know? I think on the flip side, when it came to my career, I was given a lot of free reign to do whatever I felt like doing and to pursue.
Mm-hmm.
My parents were immigrants, they came to Canada, and, they hadn't gone through a school system. So there was a lot of like, Auroosa, you figure out what you want to do and you do you type of a thing.
Right. Right.
Obviously within certain constraints, right? But generally speaking,
Yeah.
generally speaking, I had a lot of freedom to just choose whatever profession I wanted. So I had a lot of support in that way. But I think I do feel frustrated sometimes in my non-ability to explain what I do in like a short sentence where people understand what I do.
Yeah.
So I can relate to
Definitely
that.
not an elevator pitch. You're gonna have to sit down for a few minutes.
No,
Let me explain this
totally.
to you. Yeah.
Next, Sania and I talk about arranged marriage and why it might be particularly difficult to go through the arranged marriage process if you're a middle child.
So, first of all, there's this idea that this girl who is at marriageable age, she's done school. She might want to do more school, but I don't really care. She's like 22 plus, so she's marriage ready. And I know some people who might be good for her, so I'm just going to play middle person. There's people who like to play middle. And I don't think that that's bad. I think that that can help a lot of individuals, but the people playing middle should be very, very mindful and careful. They should know both parties at a very personal level so that they're not really like subjecting people to any awkwardness or any sort of hurt. So I don't think, so that's kind of point one. People have not quite been mindful. They don't really know me that well. They just see the outwardly stuff and they see the outwardly stuff on the other party and they're like, oh, this could work. Let's give this a shot. So anyways, they try to introduce the two parties. The two parties don't meet face to face. It's really just, a phone call between the parents and then it's exchanging biodata.
What's in your biodata, Sania?
Oh goodness, I got my sister to make it because I was just like, I can't believe this is happening. You just do it. I don't even care. So she made it for me. But anyway, so the girl tends to receive the picture of the guy and his biodata first.
Okay.
The picture doesn't really matter how accurate it is. It's just, you get what you get, right? And whatever. So you make your decision on that. If it's something that you want to sort of try, then you give the guy's mother a call and then she asks for the girl's biodata. So when you send biodatas, you should send something similar to what you received, right?
Okay.
So if I received a picture of a guy and it's just kind of like, his face is looking in a different direction. It's kind of not really clear, but I get a sense of what he looks like, just like whatever. Although that's a really shallow way to evaluate someone.
Hold on. Are you saying the picture that you got was like a picture somebody might post on a dating profile where it's like, I'm not quite sure what they look like exactly. Like it's like
I mean, how you can just sort of see this person, like you know that, okay, like there's two eyes, a nose, and a mouth, and a head, and a body, right? So
you
not
basically
accurate.
Okay, so the picture that you received
was
sort of, you couldn't fully make out like this person's features or whatever, like
it wasn't the most clear. It was just a very regular picture, but please note the fact that it was slightly blurry. And also, he was not looking directly at the camera.
You have higher expectations for when you purchase something online, where you're like, why are there blurry pictures of this thing that I'm going to purchase?
I'd like you to hold that idea of purchasing something online. Please hold that.
Okay.
So anyways, I send pictures of a similar nature. I'm not going to go and send, first of all, my best picture of me from my sister's wedding, super dolled up, hair curled, makeup did, everything. No, I'm going to send you a very realistic picture of what I look like. And,
that's blurry, right?
It wasn't like, you couldn't see like the ridges on my nose, but it was enough for you to get a sense of, okay, this is what this person looks like. Similar idea. So and I know that a lot of people tend to send the best pictures that they have of themselves, irregardless of what they receive. But I was like, no, let's be a little strategic about this. Let's actually just send what we got. and take it from there. And keep in mind, we did not complain about the pictures we received. When I sent my biodata and the picture, the next message that we received was, these pictures are not clear. I was like, okay, can you and there was a request to please send more, as if people are just entitled to my pictures, as if my picture is, or you need to assess, like, what more do you need to assess? This was perfectly good. This was actually much better than what I received, and I still didn't even complain, because I think it's really shallow to judge someone based off of the way they look. And B, what more do you really need to see? Like, are you trying to, you know what I mean? So, well, really how this ended up happening was, I was like, no, we are not sending more pictures. I am against this. This is wrong at a fundamental level. And whoever was the middle person can just tell them that I'm not interested anymore in pursuing this further. And, there was a little bit of like back and forth with that. People thought that I was just being a little bit, like, this is just part of how things are. Why don't we just send another picture? Let's just see how this goes. Apparently his father and his parents were fine with me. He just was like a little bit confused or unsure. And another thing was, I was wearing a more of a baggy, like a baggier shirt, a kurta. So you don't see like the physique, but he just thought that, is she fat? Is she not? And I'm like, wow, you're so shallow. That's literally, that is what was the thought process from the other party. And so I was like, no, this cannot go forward. And I'm like, this is just, so that ended. And I just thought to myself, this is pathetic. Like if this is what people have to go through, if this is a sense of entitlement people engage in this process, if you have a very specific way or specific criteria, just go and look for someone yourself, right? Don't just like hand out your biodata to everyone who will forward your biodata, and then you're going to sit there and assess people. And then if you don't like something minor, then you're just going to make them feel like crap about themselves. You know what I mean? So it really got me thinking about just the system as a whole. And this doesn't, obviously, a lot of people have different experiences with arranged marriage. My sister had arranged marriage. It worked out perfectly. It worked out beautifully. It works for a lot of people. But I think that there is an inherent sense of entitlement. There is an inherent feeling of crappy, that comes with it.
Okay, so I can understand what you're saying about, like, it's actually very vulnerable to put your picture out there like that, and that someone is just basing you on your picture, whether essentially it's like swiping right or swiping left, right? Like this is, but because it's parents and another person and everything else, it feels even more like personal. Your family's involved, yeah. Like, and if they don't go forward, it feels really awkward. Like, why didn't it go forward, etc. So I get that part. I think the part that I'm more not on the fence about, because I get what you're saying, but maybe there's another side to it, is the looks piece. So I think attraction is like important, right? Like whenever, even if you were like walking somewhere and you saw somebody, I think our minds make a split second sort of reaction as to whether this person is attractive to us or not, right? And sometimes some people become attractive as you get to know them as well, and vice versa. Sometimes you meet somebody who is attractive and they start to talk and they become less attractive to you. Based on, it's happened to me before. But, based on whatever it is that's important to you, right? So based on what they're saying, etc. So I understand wanting a clearer picture. I think you should also have the right to ask for a clearer picture. Like, it should be the same expectation both ways. Mm-hmm. And that part, I think I would have a problem with as well, that why are you sending me this like blurry, incomplete sort of picture, but then expecting from me that I send something that's like accurate, right? Like, then accuracy should be both ways. So I agree with that it should be equal. But I don't know if...
I know what you're saying. Like, people are allowed to feel attracted to whoever they are. And that's fair. I agree with that 100%.
You don't actually touch on this part as much of what you were saying, but I think it may be playing a role, and correct me if I'm wrong. I think one of the things that I've noticed is that culturally, it seems like for a guy, the emphasis is placed on his education. If it's on, and his job, right? If it's on a physical thing, normally it's height, but it's not like how they look. So the fact that they sent you a, blurry picture or whatever, it's like, but we gave you the information on what is really important that you might be looking for in a guy, right? Quote unquote. But for a girl, the standard is sort of like the biodata matters in terms of your age, maybe in terms of your education, although it depends on the person, right? But really, they're looking at your picture. That's
Yeah,
what, the emphasis is
that's true.
placed on, right? So it feels more personal because it's like you're just basing me off my looks. You're not really getting to know me as a person. I'm just reduced to this picture. The same thing happens for guys as well, where they're just reduced to stats.
Yeah.
But the stats don't feel as offensive in some ways as a physical sort of like, like, like a rejection in that way. And so I don't know if that's playing a role in how you felt about this.
Which is why, again, like, it's not just about questioning the situation. I'm never going to say that, these people were evil, but, it's just questioning, like, the process as a whole, right? Like, people are engaging in this without really putting a lot of thought into it and how it can impact people. It's the small things that can really impact an individual, and not everyone's kind of going in this with a really casual way of thinking. They actually, when I send you a picture of me, that's a huge thing to me. I can't not think about the fact that, like, you are assessing me on something and without having any context to me as an individual. So yeah, and the way I was going about it also was, how do I not do injustice to this guy as well?
Right.
If I'm holding them to a certain standard to treat me a certain way, it's because I want to treat this individual to that same standard as well.
Yeah.
I don't want to make him feel crappy because of whatever. And I think it's just, maybe it's a cultural, societal thing. It's also just the way the system of this whole, arranged marriage thing works. But, you have to have thick skin. And people there's an element of sensitivity that just inherently doesn't exist in our society. We, as you mentioned earlier, you're supposed to take things as a grain of salt and not read too deeply into it. But that doesn't work for a lot of people who do that.
Yeah. And I think, it's interesting for me, this ties back into the middle child thing as well, because as I've talked to other middle children, I've noticed some of the stuff you brought up that I feel like connects to this idea is, one, the idea of fairness. Like, I know fairness for me and things being equal is so important. And I think it comes from maybe feeling that things weren't equal and wanting to make sure that I'm being fair, and like whatever I'm doing, that I'm being fair. And that's, I think, where some of that stems from. Another thing is like vulnerability and judgment. Right. So I know for me, for a long time, and even now, like there's this fear of being judged or being misunderstood. Like someone taking one aspect and not really getting to know what's deeper behind it and just making an impression based on that. And that also, I think, comes from me feeling like I was misunderstood, right? Or like I tried to communicate or I tried to say things, but because I was different or because, maybe I didn't have the same voice in the same way, I had this inner feeling for a long time. And putting your picture out there like that, like it is very vulnerable and it feels very personal, But I think for other people, and this may not be related to birth order at all, but I think for a lot of people, they may not think about it in that way. Like it's just sort of like, it's like putting your picture on Tinder or something else, like on online, whatever, And I think that affects people as well, but I think there are definitely people who it doesn't really bother them.
Well, you have to be in that frame of mind where you understand the risks of like what you're doing, right? Like you're prepared for that mentally and emotionally, so it may not even affect you. I think it was just premature for me as well, because in my head I didn't quite understand like, or how does this even work, even though it's such a simple idea and something that we've grown up with and it's been around us. But for me, when I was actually experiencing it, I was like, oh my God, this is just so like, it feels so strange. And I just feel so vulnerable to a point where I'm not ready for this and I'm not ready for that. I didn't ask for this. And so why do I have to go through this unnecessary sort of like thinking and stress and even just pain? I wasn't ready for that. So it comes back to the whole taking a stand and knowing where you stand, right? With these kind of situations. This is just an example, but I think this can be applied to any sort of situation in life where you have to know, like, if you're not ready for this, if you're not in the right frame of mind for this, make this clear to people and stand up for that. I think that becomes very tempting when the people who you trust, you love, and you care about, and the people who love you so much really are like, no, this is fine, this is good. You want to take their advice and you want to go forward with it, but again, advocate for yourself and just express your concerns. I don't think it hurts, and it'll actually serve you, because you know what you're doing is for yourself, and it's to protect your own energy, which I think is like incredibly important.
Remember how I was talking about people pleasing earlier?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, people pleasing also has to do with I want people to generally like me. It doesn't mean
Yeah.
romantically, but I mean
Yeah.
like me as a person, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't go the arranged marriage route, and this was a part of why, but not really a part of why. But I think if I had gone through the arranged marriage route, one of the things that would have been hard for me is that if someone rejects you, it's hard not to feel like that's more about who you are as a person instead of
Yep.
they don't romantically want to be with you. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so because I like to people please and I want people to like me and I'm always trying to find a place that I belong and all of this sort of stuff, I'm much more sensitive to then things make me feel like I don't belong or they don't like me or I'm a bad person or
Yeah.
whatever, right? Like I'm much more prone to those feelings. And so
Mm-hmm.
being in that type of environment, instead of taking it as something like, oh, we didn't click, and not taking it as anything more than that, I think it would be hard for me because I
Yeah.
already have certain feelings and thoughts, and I'm working on trying to be like, those aren't true. You don't need to do that. You need to, take a stand for who you are and be okay with that and be okay with being different and accept and love yourself. I'm
Mm-hmm.
definitely working on a lot of those things, but I think I spent a lot of my childhood and somewhat of my adolescence trying to just not blend, but be a good daughter, be a good
Oh
person,
yeah,
balance, be
100%.
good,
Yes, yes.
and what does that even mean? I think, right? You talked about being a middle child. You have a lot of time to observe stuff. And I asked a lot of questions because I was always observing things. And I really struggle with these ideas of being good and what being good means. And I think for a long time, what it meant to me was like, everybody's happy with you. That you did a good job if everybody was happy in the end and satisfied,
Mm.
regardless of how you actually may have felt about it. But like, it
Mm-hmm.
was about pleasing other people, and that's what it meant to be a good person and balancing different people's needs and stuff, which then puts yourself on the back burner.
Yep.
And I've seen that a lot with people who are middle children in the conversations I've had, that there's a common element in this wanting to be good or
Mm-hmm.
do what's expected. And then reaching a certain point where you're like, I can't do what's expected because it's so against my values or beliefs and my nature. And then to be like, what do you do now?
Yeah.
Like, do you fight that and go, no, like, this is who I am and I have to love myself and accept it? Or
Mm.
do you go, well, like, they care about me. Maybe they know best. They're more experienced. Like, it's easy to talk yourself out of knowing what you need and
Mm-hmm.
what's important to you.
Yeah.
And maybe birth order has nothing to do with that. I don't know. But I have found as I've had conversations with people, sometimes like brand new people, I met this person once for like a coffee, and she was in a position that I aspired to one day potentially be in terms of work. And so I had emailed her and I said, hey, I'm so and so. We met here. Would you mind if we connected for like a conversation? I'm, doing some career exploration. And she was like, sure. And so we met and we were talking about our experiences. And I don't know if I asked or she asked, but we were like, are you a middle child? And then the other person was like, yes, I am. And then I'm like, oh my God, because you have just described my experience
Oh my.
so to a T, right? And that's why, I'm harping on this middle child piece, not to say other people don't experience it, and not to say being a middle child is a unified experience, because it's not. But I thought it was so funny that this person I did not even know,
Yeah.
and after talking for like 15, 20 minutes, we were like, wait a second. I think I think you're a
You
middle
must be one
child.
of
You
us.
must be one of us. Come to our cult of middle children. But what was interesting actually about her is that she had very similar experiences, but she went the opposite direction. Like where I tried to fit in the box and I put myself in a very tightly constrained box, I think she was like, I see you blocks. I'm gonna go over there. Like, she felt the same pressure and she felt everything else, but because of other aspects of her personality, she was like, I'm gonna resist that and go here, you
Yeah.
know? And so she dealt with it in a very different way, but she experienced a lot of the same feelings and had a lot of similar experiences that I had. So it was interesting to see there's a lot of other things that go into play with how we respond to what happens to us and all our life experiences.
So that concludes part 1 of our 2-part episode, Diary of Two Middle Children. My question for all of you is, if you are a middle child, can you relate to some of the things that we talked about? Are you also a people pleaser, afraid of judgment, and have felt neglected in your family? And if you're not a middle child, do you relate to any of these feelings regardless? I know that feeling judged is something that's really been difficult for me, so I'd love to hear from people whether they have found that they also feel some of these feelings, as well as if you've gone the arranged marriage route, has that been something that was nerve-wracking for you? So please share with us. You can comment on this episode or on any of our posts on Instagram. Until next time, take care.